Welcome, everyone. Good evening and welcome. The first order of business is we were so hoping that Father Ted Hesburgh could join us tonight, but he is not going out at night anymore, and he sent his regrets and also a message. So,
I believe that one of the greatest things that's happened in the history of Notre Dame is the advent of women as students and women as faculty members and women as trustees of the university. That may not sound like a big thing, but this was a great male bastion, and no one thought it could possibly assimilate women. The fact is that women are, in many ways, a lot smarter than men, and I knew that if I could only get them aboard, they'd make their own way. And so it came that way. And I'm just delighted we have a better university, a better Catholic university, a better modern university today, because we have women as well as men in the mix. And we have women in leadership positions. And we have women with their idealism. And they're very special. This has gone off.
isn't that wonderful? And thanks to Anne Therese for facilitating that. So, good evening and welcome. My name is Kathleen Sprouse Cummings. I'm a faculty member in the Department of American Studies, and I also direct the Cushwa Center for the Study of American Catholicism. I'd like to begin by thanking our co-sponsors for tonight at Baden Hall. I understand there are a lot of Baden people here. Wonderful. The Department of American Studies. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. The Department of American Studies, the Department of History, the Program of Gender Studies. And I'd also like to particularly thank my colleagues at the Cushwa Center, Heather Grennan-Gary and Paula Brock, for all their fantastic work in promoting this event. Thanks especially to all of you for coming tonight and for helping us mark the 40th anniversary of coeducation at Notre Dame. Anniversaries like this one are important to celebrate. First of all, because they provide an opportunity to honor the people on whose shoulders we stand. As a woman who has been at Notre Dame for the better part of 20 years now, unbelievably in some ways, first as a graduate student and now as a faculty member, I really welcome this chance to thank the alumni who truly paved the way for us. But it is particularly as a scholar and as a teacher of American women's history that I want to mark this occasion. I've done a lot of research on women historically in women in Catholic institutions, and that research both inspires me and frustrates me, what I uncover in that research. I marvel at the giant leaps that women have made in the church and beyond, and I'm grateful to the talented and faithful women of the past for what they overcame for the benefit of future generations. But at the same time, I'm often saddened by patterns of gender-based prejudice that persist, by the recalcitrance of some customs and perspectives, and by the limitations and invisibility that women continue to experience at times. So it's in that spirit that I hope we can use this 40th anniversary not only to recognize how much progress has been made, how much progress women have made at Notre Dame in the last 4 decades, but also to envision where we want to be in 40 years from now. And that's why I'm particularly thrilled to see so many undergraduates in the audience. And I asked them to help me in honoring those who confronted more daunting challenges than they could ever imagine. And I also invite them to be part of a future where women are an even more vibrant and influential presence in the Notre Dame family.
Good evening. It's a great honor to be here this evening, and I'd like to especially thank all of the sponsors that put this evening together, but especially all the women from Baden, the Bullfrogs, I believe you're called now. I want to give a special shout out to each one of you. I think it's important when we look back 40 years ago that times were totally different. President Nixon was in the White House. He had just won a landslide election against Governor McGovern. Gas was 55 cents a gallon. A postage stamp was 8 cents. And we were only just 2 years removed from the Kent State shootings. That played an important role because I did my undergraduate degree at Ohio State. And I almost didn't graduate because the governor at that time shut down Ohio State when all of the campus rioting began. And I know Notre Dame went through a tremendous time also. But our last year as an undergrad, my memories are walking with National Guard, having tear gas, having buckets of water at all of the residence halls, at all of the libraries, just to wash away the effects of that. So this was the climate that we were working into. And back just 2 years later, I was a third-year law student at Notre Dame, 24 years old, and was honored to be selected by Father Blantz. And if you really want to egg him on, ask him how I was really selected, because I was really a mistake. But a great mistake, in my opinion. In my class at Notre Dame, I was one of 12 women. The class before me had 5. The class before that had 1. So I think part of my selection was because we had some battle scars, and we were able to get through it. As Father Tom mentioned, also on the staff, they wanted someone older and religious. Well, I didn't fit either of those criteria. So they selected Sister Sue Bennett, who was my assistant rector. And then one of my fellow colleagues from law school, a third-year law student who was born in Cuba, Carmen Leon, was one of our RAs. One of the things that we decided, and I'm sure Jane Pitts can talk about this from Walsh, but we decided that we have to roll with the waves, and we're going to be very positive about this transition. We have to be sensitive to the men, and talking with Father Gorski, who was the rector of Howard Hall at that time, we had to be sensitive because we were displacing the men from those dorms. There was a commitment there that the university had made to them, and they thought that that commitment had been broken. So I like to use humor, that we had to build Baden as a family, that we were all in this together. And the ratio, again, Anne-Therese has a better memory perhaps than I do 40 years later, but I thought the ratio back then was about 1 to 17. 1 woman for every 17 males that were on campus. And it became very apparent that the men started learning about what the GPAs were, the women. And there weren't a whole lot of dates at that time because of the intimidation, because of those GPAs. Another common complaint that we dealt with, little things, is that the women's dorms had washers and dryers and the men didn't. I mean, that caused so much tumult that it was just unbelievable. So we decided to start a speaker event at Baden, and we started inviting people, and we started with the first former resident, and that was Father Ted. And that was a night to remember. It truly was. We also invited Father Reilly, who was then the Dean of Students, basically the person that did all the discipline at that point. And then we had a contest about, let's have an identity of our own. Let's have a T-shirt that's truly Baden Hall. Well, believe it or not, I can still get into this T-shirt 20 years later. And that is what we came up with. Well, this same T-shirt we gave to Father Tom, we gave to Father Hesberg, we gave to Father Reilly, and we gave to Father Schultz. Father Tom and Father Schultz were our chaplains in the hall. And that Christmas, all of them wore them. And it was just great. It was just great. The one thing that we talked about during the conversations with our speakers that we had in the dorm were the lack of role models. And I can remember Father Ted saying very vividly, our best role model is at the top of the Golden Dome. And then Father Tom and Father Schultz then incorporated in their sermons at daily Mass a lot about women of the Bible, and especially during the Lenten service. And that really meant a lot. But then finally, I think just because of my nagging perhaps, the university finally eventually invited the only sitting woman in the U.S. Senate at that time, and that was Senator Margaret Chase Smith. And again, that was another totally memorable evening. And the one thing that she talked about, because she was in both the House and also in the Senate, she began her career in 1949. This was 1972. And she said, the one word of advice that I can give to all of you young Coeds is always be a lady. Always be a lady. And I took that that advice to heart. I think it's important. I think also it's important to have that positive dialogue. And, we learn from the people that brought us up. My mom was a Rosie the Riveter during World War II in Cleveland, Ohio, while my dad was fighting in Anzio. I mean, we went through a lot of struggles. So the struggles that we had on campus were nothing like the generation before us. I would like to really give a special thanks to the Congregation of Holy Cross, the priests and brothers that worked so hard to make this a success. They took the time, and I really challenge all the women that are co-eds today to talk with people like Father Tom, to take the time to see Father Hesburgh, because you'll regret if you don't take the time to see the models that we were so fortunate to have. It's almost like doing genealogy. You wished you would have asked your grandparents, and then they're gone, and you just don't have that appreciation. People like Father Ned Joyce, Father Jim Schultz, who have passed on, Father Jerry Wilson, who, when the university flew me down to Florida to give an update on coeducation, I mean, what a delightful individual. Father Chambers, Father Brown, Father Toohey. Father Toohey just packed Sacred Heart. Just great. Father Griffin and Darby, his dog. Brother Bookstore, who we call Brother Bookstore, but Brother Moran. Brother Karen Ryan. I mean, just pillars of this university. And I really challenge the women of Baden to learn more about who Father Baden was and how he mentored the Potawatomi Indians. My husband is buried in Cedar Grove, and there's a monument to those Potawatomi Indians over there. There's such a rich history that this university has. And I think not only should we celebrate it today for 40 years, but you should celebrate every single day that you have an opportunity to get a great education at a super university. I am honored and very privileged to be here with you this evening, and I hope I get to meet many of you. Thank you. One thing that I forgot, you all heard about the sign that you had. The welcome sign on the South Dining Hall. Well, Baden Hall also had a sign, and some of you might remember. Many of you may not know who this is, but this is Golda Meir, who is the Prime Minister of Israel. We had a huge sign of her, and underneath it, but can you type? Thank you.
When I was an undergraduate here from 1969 to 1973, the football team was number one more often than not. In fact, 7 months after I graduated, many of us were in New Orleans at the Sugar Bowl, where we upset Alabama, winning by 1 point and becoming national champions. Now that would be the way to cap off the 40th anniversary of coeducation. But there's another aspect to being one, a single, solitary digit at Notre Dame that I want to talk about tonight. That's as it relates to Notre Dame coeducation. When I was here on campus, one of the most popular songs blaring in and out of all the dorms was Harry Nielsen's One, as in, one is the loneliest number you could ever do. Being a co-ed pioneer here was exhilarating, baffling, a thrill-a-minute adventure, but at times, being the single co-ed pioneer was most assuredly the loneliest number you could ever do. Guys, here's your cue. I need 7 guys to come up here and surround me for a minute. Just 7 for right now. The year before, can you get around me? Just 7. The year before Notre Dame went co-ed, the ratio of Notre Dame men to St. Mary's women was 7-1. So will you get around me? Okay, here I am. Go ahead. the one St. Mary's gal with the 7 guys around me. That was daunting enough, as you can see. But 1 year later, with 325 transfer students in Baden and Walsh, plus the 73 girls from my class, in the class of 73 who were grandfathered or grandmothered in, you can take your pick, because our majors were Notre Dame majors and we had to get Notre Dame degrees. We couldn't get St. Mary's degrees. All of a sudden, this 7-to-1 ratio becomes 20-to-1. So may I have a few more men come up so you can see what 20-to-1 actually looks like. Okay, we have 14. We need 6 more. 15, 16. Can we have a couple more?
Dan will come over.
We need a couple more.
Father will come
Okay. Thanks, Father Tom. Okay, so this is 20-to-1, guys. Thank you. Here's another example of how goofy things were. The women in my class of 1973 are the recipients of perhaps the most unusual and creative transcripts that Notre Dame has ever issued. For reasons that were never explained to us, technically, we were Notre Dame students for only 19 days. Our transcripts read, transferred in as a transfer student May 1, 1973, graduated May 20, 1973. Not only were we Coed pioneers, we apparently revolutionized the definition of quick studies. The majority of professors, deans, administrators, and male students were supportive and encouraging. That said, weird things happened. True story. One of my best friends was kicked out of a required class for her government major repeatedly, starting in January when we came back for the spring semester, because the prof said that he never taught a woman and he wasn't about to start. So for 2 weeks, all that Sue did was bounce back and forth like a ping pong ball from her class, which was on the 4th floor of the ad building, over to Dean Waddick's office. And finally, she couldn't do it anymore. And she called her brother, who was at Tulane, and she said, "What am I going to do?" And he said, "So simple. You got to get the top grade on the first quiz. If you do that, he'll shut up," which is exactly what happened. And she ended up with the top grade in the class in the spring. Amazingly, she wasn't the only one of my classmates who experienced this. I circulated my remarks to my classmates a month ago, and I was stunned. We all were stunned at the stories that came back. Being one of 20 fundamentally changed the women that my classmates and I became. Some of the changes were cosmetic, as in clothing. Notre Dame is one of the last places on earth, even today, that could be described as pink, fuzzy, or frilly. One of the most basic ways to fit in around here, as you know, but particularly when you are 1 in 20, was to dress like the guys. Dark colors, jeans, sweats, nothing to stand out. To dress like a woman at any time except on a football weekend was inviting trouble. A sense of humor also went a long way, particularly when you were in a class, the prof said, "Mister," and he was talking directly to you. Or he asked for the woman's point of view, looking directly at you. A smile, some harmless flirting, like flirting, was absolutely essential. When I wanted to do something that old-timers hadn't gotten the memo that the place had gone Coed said I couldn't do, like golfing on the university's golf course, which had been donated with the stipulation women never set foot on it. What really helped us deal with the spasms of loneliness from being the only one on the Pioneer Trail was the immediate open door policy from the beginning on the part of all of the university administrators, including Father Ted, especially Father Tom Blantz, Kathy Sikansky here tonight, the deans, the academic department chairs, even if it meant meeting at night. The door was open if, but especially if there was a problem, but also if you just needed to unwind and talk about the weirdness of your day. And they could get really weird. Such as, what do you say to your closest male friends working with me on The Observer who were staunch supporters of coeducation, editorials on it every day? What happens when their beloved Baden Hall, which is where most of them lived, was one of the first 2 dorms selected for women? These guys were stunned because it meant that a close group of men wouldn't be living together anymore. And to their credit, even though they were heartbroken, after their first appeal went nowhere, they went along with the decision, and the first day that Baden opened in August, the guys were there to help move the girls in and to meet them, which was a real classy thing to do. Or in another class that once again only occurred in my class of 1973, what do you say to the St. Mary's side of your class when you go back to your room at St. Mary's that night after having spent the entire day at Notre Dame in classes? Because only Baden and Walsh were selected to house women, the 73 of us who were getting Notre Dame degrees by agreement with the CSCs and with the nuns across the street were housed at St. Mary's our senior year, which meant that we would take our classes here, we would go home at night. We became a wandering diaspora with the only constant in our life being the shuttle bus. We were ecstatic to be getting Notre Dame degrees, but very mindful of the feelings of the majority of our St. Mary's classmates who were not, many of them still believe to this day, should have been awarded Notre Dame degrees as well. Talk about awkward, that is the definition. As awkward as that was, rivaling it was the competition that developed among the St. Mary's freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, almost all of whom applied to Notre Dame as transfer students. 750 of them applied for the 35 original openings over here, which meant that not only were they all competing against each other, they were also competing against women applicants from other colleges and universities. Business and engineering junior majors from St. Mary's were given preference because they had already completed a part of their major. They were well into them, which reduced the number of openings for everybody else. There were a lot of hard feelings at St. Mary's when those acceptance letters went out. Many friendships that were started at St. Mary's didn't continue once a woman moved across the road. I really wish Notre Dame and St. Mary's had merged, not only for the St. Mary's side of my class, but for everyone. It would have been, and it still would be, a win-win for everyone. I'm still not convinced that a merger won't happen sometime in the future, when there's an entirely new cast of characters with no prior history and no prior prejudices. In hindsight, being a Notre Dame Coed pioneer was the best preparation for something that my classmates and I couldn't have envisioned was going to happen when we graduated. My class became one of the first to benefit from the women's movement. Those of us who went into corporate America after graduation weren't limited to jobs as secretaries or other traditional women's jobs. We were considered for, and in some cases hired into, jobs that only a few years earlier were traditional jobs for men only. And one of the selling points for getting those jobs and getting those interviews was being a co-ed pioneer at Notre Dame. I didn't mind I'd been the only woman in a room. Been there, done that. It taught me how to comport myself in the room, poise, confidence without brashness, ignore the morons, and absolutely make sure you know who won which game the night before so you're readily accepted by the guys. Thank you.